Hello, I'm Essay, your AI essayist. Please note that all content, audio and video in this presentation are AI generated. As AI can sometimes produce inaccuracies, I encourage you to verify any factual information presented. With that in mind, let's begin.
In the intellectual history of the 20th century, few texts detonate with the force of John Maynard Keynes' 1936 masterwork, The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money. It is a volume born of crisis, a direct and revolutionary confrontation with a dominant economic paradigm that appeared impotent in the face of the Great Depression's crushing human and economic toll. To read the general theory is to witness the construction of a new intellectual world, a system designed to comprehend an economy that had fallen into a persistent state of disequilibrium. Keynes aimed for a complete reorientation of economic thought, moving its central problem from the allocation of scarce resources in a world of full employment to the determination of the aggregate level of output and employment in a world where idleness of labour and capital was a grim and enduring reality. His work furnished both a diagnosis and a prescription, forever altering the relationship between the state and the market economy and establishing the very language of modern macroeconomics. The intellectual landscape Keynes sought to overturn was the classical tradition, a powerful lineage stretching from Adam Smith and David Ricardo to its contemporary custodians, Alfred Marshall and Arthur Pigou. This orthodoxy rested upon a set of elegant and internally consistent axioms. Its cornerstone was Say's law of markets, the proposition that supply creates its own demand. The act of producing goods generated an equivalent stream of income in the form of wages, profits and rents, which would then be spent on purchasing those same goods. Any temporary imbalances would be swiftly corrected by the price mechanism. Flexible wages would eliminate unemployment in the labour market, while flexible interest rates would equate savings and investment in the capital market. The system, if left to its own devices, would always gravitate toward a full employment equilibrium. The mass unemployment of the 1920s presented a profound and devastating anomaly to this view. It was a condition the classical model deemed impossible, a real-world phenomenon that its theoretical apparatus could only explain away as a temporary friction or the result of foolish impediments like trade unions or minimum wage laws. Keynes found these explanations wholly inadequate. Observing a world where unemployment was systemic, involuntary, and tragically persistent, he concluded the problem lay deep within the theoretical foundations of the classical school itself, what he termed its special case applicability, valid only in the unique circumstance of full employment. It always assumed the revolutionary core of the general theory lies in its inversion of Say's law. For Keynes, the causal arrow pointed in the opposite direction. The aggregate level of demand determines the level of employment and output, a quantity with no inherent tendency toward its full potential. The central analytical tool he forged for this purpose was the principle of effective demand. This principle identifies the point where the aggregate demand function, representing total spending in the economy, intersects with the aggregate supply function, representing the total revenue businesses must receive to justify a given level of employment. The economy's equilibrium could settle at any point along the supply curve, with full employment being a single, and indeed unlikely, possibility among many. This framework immediately introduced the concept of an underemployment equilibrium, a health where significant resources and labour remained. To explain the determinants of this aggregate demand, Keynes deconstructed it into its constituent parts, consumption and investment. He proposed a psychological law governing consumption, encapsulated in the consumption function. He posited that as income rises, consumption also rises, but by a smaller amount. This relationship is captured in the equation where total consumption, C, equals the sum of autonomous consumption, A, and the product of the marginal propensity to consume, B, and total income, Y, the marginal propensity to consume, the fraction of each additional dollar of income that is spent. The behavioral parameter of crucial importance. Because its value is less than 1, a gap emerges between income and consumption spending. For the economy to sustain its level of output, this gap must be filled by other forms of spending, primarily investment. From this insight flowed the concept of the multiplier. An initial act of autonomous spending, such as government investment in public works, would generate a ripple effect. The initial recipients of this spending would in turn spend a portion of it, creating income for others, who would then spend a portion of theirs. The total increase in national income would be a multiple of the initial expenditure, with the size of the multiplier given by the formula 1 divided by the quantity 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume. This provided a powerful theoretical justification for fiscal intervention. Investment, the second component of demand, received an equally radical reimagining. In the classical view, investment was a straightforward function of the interest rate. For Keynes, the matter was profoundly more complex and unstable, governed less by arithmetic calculation and more by human psychology. He argued that the decision to invest depended on a comparison between the interest rate and the marginal efficiency of capital, defined as the expected rate of return on a new capital asset over its lifetime. The critical element here is expectation. These expectations are formed in a world of fundamental, irreducible uncertainty, a state distinct from calculable risk. Business leaders are navigating a fog, making long-term commitments based on fragile convictions about a future they can never truly know. It is here that Keynes introduces his celebrated concept of animal spirits, the spontaneous urge to action that drives enterprise. Investment becomes a function of confidence, of waves of optimistic and pessimistic sentiment that sweep through the business community, making the marginal efficiency of capital a profoundly volatile and fickle variable. The economy is therefore prone to sudden collapses in investment, driven by a failure of nerve, leading to sharp downturns in aggregate demand and employment. This psychological turn extended to his theory of interest. The classical allowable funds doctrine held that the interest rate was the price that balanced the supply of savings with the demand for investment funds. Keynes discarded this entirely. For him, the interest rate was a purely monetary phenomenon. It was the price paid to persuade wealth holders to part with liquidity. His theory of liquidity preference posits that people hold money for several reasons: for transactions, for precautionary motives, and most importantly, for speculative purposes. Given the uncertainty of the future, holding cash provides a safe haven against a potential fall in the price of other assets, like bonds. The interest rate is the reward for overcoming this preference for liquidity. It is determined in the money market by the intersection of the money supply, controlled by the central bank, and the public's demand to hold money. This formulation introduced the chilling possibility of a liquidity trap, a situation where interest rates are so low that everyone expects them to rise. In this scenario, monetary policy becomes powerless. Injections of new money are simply hoarded, failing to lower interest rates further and stimulate investment. The general theory landed like a bombshell in the academic world. Its dense, sometimes obscure prose and its wholesale assault on established truths provoked fierce debate. Champions like Joan Robinson, Roy Harrod, and Alvin Hansen in the United States worked to clarify and extend its message. Critics, most notably Friedrich Hayek of the Austrian school, viewed Keynes' focus on aggregates as a dangerous intellectual error that ignored the intricate coordination of individual plans accomplished by the price system, seeing his policy prescriptions as a slippery slope towards central planning. Perhaps the most influential interpretation came from John Hicks in his 1937 article, Mr. Keynes and the Classics. Hicks developed the ISM model, a graphical framework that synthesized Keynesian insights with classical elements. The IS curve, representing equilibrium in the goods market, and the LM curve, representing equilibrium in the money market, jointly determined national income and the interest rate. This model, later popularized in America by Paul Samuelson's textbook, became the workhorse of mainstream macroeconomics for decades. It was an extraordinary pedagogical achievement, translating Keynes' difficult ideas into a tractable tool for students and policymakers. Yet, in this process of domestication, something of the original's radical spirit was lost. The ISM framework tended to relegate the profound uncertainty and volatile expectations of the original text to mere shifts in the curves, creating what Joan Robinson would later lament as a bastard Keynesianism that stripped the theory of its most unsettling and perhaps most important insights. The post-World War II era became the high summer of this synthesized Keynesianism. Governments across the Western world embraced demand management, using fiscal and monetary policy to fine-tune their economies, pursuing the goals of full employment and stable growth. This period, known as the Trent Gloriouses or the Golden Age of capitalism, saw unprecedented prosperity, and Keynes' name became synonymous with successful economic stewardship. This consensus, however, began to fray in the 1970s. The emergence of stagflation, the simultaneous occurrence of higher unemployment and high inflation, presented a challenge that simple Keynesian models, with their stable Phillips curve trade-off between the two, struggled to explain. This opened the door for a powerful counter-revolution. Milton Friedman and the monetarists reasserted the primacy of the money supply and argued that activist fiscal policy was often destabilizing. Following them, the new classical school, led by Robert Lucas, deployed the concept of rational expectations to mount a more fundamental critique, arguing that predictable government policies would be anticipated and neutralized by rational economic agents, rendering them ineffective. For a time, Keynesianism seemed to be in full retreat. Yet, the story of Keynes' influence has a final, recursive chapter. His core ideas proved too powerful to disappear. A new generation of economists, the new Keynesians, began to build models that incorporated rational expectations while providing rigorous microeconomic foundations for the sticky wages and prices that Keynes had taken as given. Figures like Gregory Mankiw and Olivier Blanchard demonstrated how phenomena like menu costs or efficiency, wages, could lead to the kind of sluggish price adjustment that makes Keynesian policy relevant. More profoundly, the global financial crisis of 2008 triggered a dramatic revival of interest in the original, untamed Keynes of the general theory. In the face of a worldwide collapse of confidence, a liquidity trap, and plummeting investment, his analysis of radical uncertainty, animal spirits, and the potential for deep and lasting slumps seemed more prescient than ever. Policymakers instinctively reached for the Keynesian toolkit of fiscal stimulus and active central banking, a testament to the enduring power of his framework in times of acute crisis. The general theory of employment, interest, and money endures as more than an artifact of economic history. It is a living document whose central arguments resonate whenever market economies falter. Keynes accomplished a paradigm shift of the first order, permanently changing the way we think about the economy as a whole. He bequeathed to us the very vocabulary of macroeconomics, the concepts of aggregate demand, the consumption function, a multiplier, and liquidity preference. He established a compelling rationale for public responsibility in the face of economic instability. While his specific prescriptions have been debated, revised, and challenged, his fundamental insight remains unshaken that a capitalist economy, left to its own devices, possesses no certain mechanism to guarantee prosperity and full employment. It is a brilliant, mercurial, and ultimately fragile system, driven by the unpredictable currents of human psychology, and one that requires careful and intelligent stewardship to save it from its own worst tendencies. The shadow of Keynes looms long, and his great work remains the essential starting point for understanding the turbulent economic world we still inhabit.
We really appreciate you tuning in to this AI-powered presentation. Our goal is to push the boundaries of AI in content creation, and your input is invaluable. If there's a particular subject you'd like to see us tackle next, or if you have suggestions on how we could fine-tune our AI's creative prompts, please don't hesitate to leave your ideas in the comments section. We're excited to bring you more unique content very soon.